This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Although I have been listening to Terence McKenna talk about DMT for almost 30 years, no one quite put it on the map like today's guest, Rick Strassman. With his groundbreaking book and subsequent documentary, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, he really put it on the map in a way that made people take notice in a different way. Here was someone who had jumped through all of the appropriate hoops to get permission to actually conduct DMT research, and he uncovered some amazing things. However, we are here to chat with Rick today about his latest book, My Altered States, a doctor's extraordinary account of trauma, psychedelics, and spiritual growth. And it's quite different than anything he's ever written, and I found it to be quite excellent. I start off the conversation by asking Rick what inspired him to write a much more personal book.
It was a couple of things. One, as I was looking around, for the next thing to write, and the Psychedelic Handbook came out in 22, and I wanted to take a break from reading research papers and summarizing data and things. So a little more of a fictional orientation anyway, or not quite so technically oriented. And I've been taking notes on my own altered states for a long time, ever since I was a teenager. So I had a huge pile of unedited material, and I just wanted to kind of wrap it up. Um, I think from a more, professional point of view, I was interested, or I am interested, in giving a more nuanced approach to altered states, especially those brought on by drugs. A lot of it is just either just one drug or a flowery description of how fantastic they are. It's a little more of a warts and all kind of description of a number of altered states: alcohol, depression, psychedelics, meditation, all kinds of things. And I like telling stories. I don't have kids, so you tell stories, to the available audience, and I thought I would write a book and tell those stories.
Cool. And I think it says something about your integrity that you included stories that don't necessarily paint you in the best light.
No, some are horrible. Just the circumstances. Some I just brought on myself in
Absolutely.
not the most heroic manner. Yeah, but I do try to infuse the stories with some humor whenever possible.
Yeah.
And I also have got at the end of each of the chapters like a commentary describing how the experience took place, different models of understanding it, an interpretation of its contents, what I may or may not have learned from that experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was very helpful to me too, because my history is very similar. I had experiences with lots of different mind altering substances, but a lot of it was alcohol and a lot of really stupid things done under the influence of alcohol, or really embarrassing things. So it really was touching to me that you revealed those parts of your history, because I could relate to them so much. So It was,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I felt like we were comrades in, in maybe some experiences that we don't look back on so fondly.
Yeah, and it was kind of, in for, some of the chapters, it was rather stressful revisiting that material. Um, yeah, and as you, in reading the book, uh, it's quite clear my experiences with alcohol were never particularly positive. Vomiting and falling off a pool table and being completely awkward around a girl I had just met. Yeah, laying flat in a gutter, a wet gutter after a party. Yeah, so yeah, I gravitated rather quickly away from alcohol and towards psychedelics and cannabis.
Yeah, your trajectory was a lot quicker than mine. It took me a long time to get the hint that alcohol was not a good idea in my life. Were you getting ready to say something?
I was just going to ask you, Rick, if you think that there's some spiritual aspect to alcohol, like they used to use the term spirits to describe it as though you were being
Uh,
inhabited. Do you think that there is some relevance in that that's possible, that there is some spiritual aspect?
well, I think that alcohol contains a spirit, a certain kind of intelligence or sentience almost.
Hmm.
Yeah, it makes people more aggressive, more voluble, less self-conscious, emotionally labile, voluble, talk, talk, talk. Yeah, so it's a consistent effect. I mean, you could look at it as a particular constellation of brain chemistry changes, but that may only be an explanation of how the spirit actually manifests itself in our mind brain complex. Lots of people really love alcohol. I refer to a Bukowski quote about the first time he got drunk, and it was a fully psychedelic experience. He
Hmm.
was never happier in his life. The world shone around him in a way it never had before. And he says something like, "I think I have found something that will help me for a long, long time."
Hmm.
Helped me get stuck in a rut for a long, long time. Yeah, I mean, it can be very blissful. That's the effect it had on me in the beginning, and I think I kept trying to replicate that effect throughout my life, and unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way.
Well, I suppose it can. Well, I mean, what kept you going if it never replicated itself after the
Well,
first time?
I should say my frequency of use. I think if I knew when to rest off of it, like maybe have a little more respect for it, and realize that it's not good to put, because it's a pretty. I mean, it's a pretty toxic poison to put your body through that so frequently, which is what I did. I didn't have a very good sense of discipline as far as that was concerned. I was all about diving into the bliss as often as I possibly could.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I had enough blissful experiences to keep me doing it, but I got to the point where the after effect outweighed the benefits that I got the
Mhm.
previous night.
Yeah, well, I guess the Surgeon General wants to put a warning now on alcohol for cancer, I suppose. But I mean, it would at least discourage people from overusing. Well, some people just really get stimulated on alcohol. It's almost like a stimulant or cocaine. They get really quite blissful. Um, I've seen. People drink that way. They drink and they get excited, and they drink more and they get more excited, and they stay excited. Yeah, as opposed to other folks who respond, you know, uh, you know, eh, um, primarily experiencing it as a sedative
Hmm.
Yeah.
Or a depressant.
Mhm.
or a depressant, right?
For sure.
It seems to me like it's similar to heroin in that there's a law of diminishing returns. So you start maybe at that place where you reach a bliss, and then you're always chasing that dragon. You're always trying to get back to that state because you had this great first experience. But the body keeps track, and you can only get to that first place that first time And so you can't really ever replicate it. And I think that that's the dichotomy of the experience.
Yeah, I think for certain, substances, that's the case. I think that's especially pronounced with MDMA.
Mm,
The first time you take MDMA, it's just incredibly great. And it's never quite the same, at least, for a lot of the people I've, talked with. On the other hand, the first experience with a substance, it might be spectacular, but eh, um, subsequent ones may still be, very positive. Like
mhm,
my first experience of cannabis was fully psychedelic, and that's never happened before. At the same time, I continue to enjoy smoking it over the years.
To the present.
To the present,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah, it's a different, marijuana is a different creature than it was back in the '70s. It's become quite an art, as far as the cultivation of it and the potency of it. It's a lot more intense than it was. I mean, at least the pot that I had access to back in the '70s and '80s. I should say the '80s.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, the first time I smoked any cannabis product was hashish.
mm.
Mm,
Yeah, I was lucky that way. It was
yes.
quite strong hashish.
Yeah.
Yeah, these colorful clouds are pouring out of my speakers, and I went on a telepathic magic carpet ride with my roommate across the town we were living in. Yeah, it was completely psychedelic. I mean, beyond psychedelic, in some ways. Yeah, but still, I think I've established a pretty good relationship with a substance. It's been over 50 years, 55 years, I guess now.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was a very intense sounding experience with the magic carpet ride. It was like a group hallucination for the most part, or do you think it was a hallucination?
I don't really know if it's a well, I think it was telepathic in as much as we shared the same vision and the same physical sensations. Like if the carpet dropped too rapidly, we both felt it.
Wow.
And we stopped abruptly when finally got off of the carpet, and we both like lunged forward to stop the momentum. So
That's crazy.
yeah, yeah, I guess it could be called as a shared hallucination. Yeah, I'm not sure how to understand that. There may be some field of information that's monitoring everything, and
Mhm.
if you're both kind of logged into the same part of that field, you're sharing the full experience.
Yeah.
You could maybe call it a shared frequency,
Yeah, I was thinking of frequency.
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah, a shared frequency.
hallucination feels like it's kind of diminishing the experience because we have this very clinical idea of what a hallucination is. So a frequency is something more than that. To me, it's an energy that you are aligned with your person, whoever you're experiencing that with.
Uh-huh. Yeah, another way I've phrased it is a shared vision.
Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I think hallucination, connotes that it's something manufactured by the mind, whereas a frequency is something that's already there and you're just tuning into it somehow. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and and the vision part is just simply the phenomenology.
Mhm.
mhm,
Yeah.
exactly. I have a very complicated relationship with cannabis. I and I've been wanting to talk to you about this because I feel in many regards that you're an expert in the DMT field. But last January, I had gone through this strange experience of gaining and losing weight throughout my life. And I had lost a bunch of weight. And in January, we got some DMT and I decided, when Leary said set and setting, that is truly everything. It means everything. But I decided to do the DMT in my bathroom. I have a solo bathroom sitting on the toilet. And I
Oh, really?
thought
And
my rationale was I thought,
right, but
well, if I
why
get
did
s
you do that?
because I thought if I get sick, I'll be already in the bathroom.
Mm.
And I don't think you truly really knew what you were getting into,
I had
did you?
no
Yeah.
idea. And I had taken a pretty significant break from smoking cannabis. So I did the DMT, and I mean, I consider myself a lifelong psychonaut. I've had many experiences with LSD, with MDMA, lots of frequency shifts with MDMA, lifelong cannabis imbiber. So this was not a foreign, or and psilocybin. This was not a foreign experience to ingest something. But what happened was something that had never happened before to me. It was a complete 180-degree shift, state shift, where everything changed visually, physically. My environment was not my environment anymore. It was very much like an Alex Gray painting, and it was terrifying. I was truly scared. It scared me shitless, no pun intended. And it was so terrifying that I immediately started saying over and over, like there was no sound. It was just all visual. And I just said over and over, and I want to come back. I want to come back. I wanted to come back. Like I wanted to be back into this consensus reality. And it took maybe 3 to 5 minutes for me to get back into my body. After that experience, I felt very flimsy psychically and physically, and so I started to eat. I started to smoke cannabis, excessively, and I gained probably 70 pounds of the
Oh,
100
really?
pounds that I had lost.
And and that was as a result of the
Yes.
trauma of that DMT experience.
Yes, it
Yeah.
it literally scared the shit out of me. So,
Wh what was your intention in smoking it in the first place?
I think curiosity. We had recently had Danny Goler on the show,
Oh, really?
and
Cool.
we are Chris and I are very, open to psychedelic experiences, to new experiences. I think I was curious, and I thought, "I can handle this. I've tripped before. I know this space very well." But it was such a significant shift that I needed to be in my body and solid again.
Yeah, well, what kind of information came through in that visual space?
It was, again, like I jumped frequencies. I jumped into another reality that was way more animated than this reality. Everything was fluid, everything was moving. Um, it was very beautiful, but it was just so scary at how quickly it happened.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was going to get stuck there.
Mm. Well, yeah, Andrew Gallimore?
Yes.
We were trying to
Yeah,
get him
yeah, so
on.
Andrew yeah, Andrew has a new book coming out, Death by Astonishment. Yeah, so, I don't know if it's meant, to be literal, death, but still, it can feel that way. Yeah, well, so how did you finally work through it?
That's very interesting. I was in the process of my last semester obtaining my bachelor's degree in psychology. And I somehow made it. This happened in January. I somehow made it through to May and graduated with honors. And then I kind of had this existential crisis because I was headed towards becoming a therapist. I wanted to be a sex therapist. And I got so freaked out by this experience that I just felt like this is maybe not the route for me. I don't necessarily want to work in one-on-one therapy with people. And so I applied to the Maharishi International University to their David Lynch
Mhm.
program.
Yeah, I
And
started off with TM as a meditator.
so I learned transcendental meditation on August the 19th. and I have not smoked cannabis since. I've lost 40 pounds, and it is the closest thing that I can describe to having a psychedelic experience without taking any substance. So I
Mhm.
would say the transcendental meditation, in many regards, saved my life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Well, good. I mean, yeah, people can have really traumatic experiences from psychedelics, and I think the ones that come on so quickly and just,
Yes.
thrust you into this alternate reality can be the most traumatic because you just can't prepare no matter no matter how well you do prepare, like making certain that the room is comfortable and whatnot. But the rapidity of the transition can be really disorienting. Were you by yourself or were you with Chris?
Chris was downstairs. Chris has 2 sons that are with us every other week, and the kids had just left the house. It was on a Sunday, and Chris was downstairs working on podcast editing as he normally does when he has free time, and I got out of the bathroom. I was able to finally stand up, and I got out of the bathroom, and I laid down on our bed and very weakly called him, like said, "Crit," and he was like, "What?" And I said, "Can you come here?" And he came into the room, and I was basically in the fetal position, and I said, "I just need you to hug me. I need the physical weight of your body on me to get me back inside." And
So, Chris, did you know that Hunter was about to smoke DMT up in the bathroom?
Not in the least. No, I think it happened
Yeah,
very spontaneously. Like, I
yeah.
think the little voice came to you and you went, "Yeah, sounds good." And I had no, or else I would have, I would have maybe talked to her a little
You,
bit about it.
yeah,
Yes.
and maybe sat for her and whatnot.
Yes.
Well, Terrence used to say, "One's hand always shakes lighting the pipe."
yes.
When you're about to fire up some DMT.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to go in with some trepidation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for that substance now, and there's a side of me that wants to try it again in a different environment. I've thought, because I like to do things that are maybe a little unusual. I thought, "Oh, I could do it in a flotation tank, or I could do it outside or at the beach or somewhere else." And then this rational side of me is like, "No, just keep meditating and just pump the brake for a moment. It's okay."
Uh-huh. Yeah, I would suggest a really comfortable, boring, safe space to do it with.
Yes.
And you don't want to add misery to terror.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Yes, for sure.
No, it was beautiful. That was what was so um, complicated about it, was that the what I experienced visually was so all encompassing. It wasn't like when I've taken mushrooms I see again, I can see the aura of the world. I can see the aura of trees. I can see things as they are, but with this other layer on top of them. It was not like that at all. It was like someone peeled this onion.
oh, yeah, yeah. Well, people, are smoking, 5-MeO DMT, 5-methoxy DMT, which is more potent on a milligram per milligram basis. And it's not really a drug that creates a lot of mental content. It's mostly just a whiteout.
Mm,
And you're out of your body and you just lose all sense of self. You may even not remember a lot of the trip. You may, crawl around or scream or flail or, do any number of things and have no recollection. And people can be traumatized from 5-methoxy DMT. I think more than DMT. Because you just don't remember what you did or what happened, which I think can be very troubling.
mm,
And flashbacks are the most common on that drug. From what I've heard, relative, um, to other psychedelics. There was a Dutch study a number of years ago. They were following the participants in a 5-methoxy DMT retreat in Holland, I think. Yeah, and a number of people smoked it, and a number of people got it intramuscularly. And the number of people with flashbacks was enormous, like 75%,
Wow.
or something. Most people describe the flashbacks as positive and cool and fun and a free trip, but if you've got serious depression, let's say, and you're going to be experimenting or even being treated with 5-methoxy DMT, I think people are going to need to be very careful about the flashback phenomenon.
Do you think that DMT is like LSD in the sense that your state of mind that you are in when you take it is sort of could possibly be a template for, or like something that is superimposed over your experience of the drug itself? Or do you, with DMT, sort of leave that at the door and go someplace completely different?
Well, I mean, even if you went someplace completely different, you would still only be able to view it, to perceive it using your mind-brain complex, which is uniquely yours. Based on your experiences and your genetics and what you've seen and what you've read and what the emotional, your emotional life. So yeah, I think it's 100% dependent, even if it's, well, that would certainly be the case if it was just, purely your brain on drugs. But if it weren't, and you were, perceiving some alternate level of of reality, I think you'd still be dependent
Hmm.
on,
Your
the receiving
interface.
apparatus,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is you.
exactly. So, I mean, what is your take? Visiting, is it it's I know it's all subjective, but the one of the big, discussions surrounding the DMT experience is, are you manifesting this stuff internally in your mind, or are you actually visiting a place? Because it seems like, I mean, and organizations like DMTX, which I am pretty sure you have a lot to do with, uh, are about going in and sort of mapping this place as if it were a place. Is that your belief, or what is your take?
Um, well, I mean, I'd have to ask you, um, what difference would it make?
Yeah, I don't know if it makes any difference whatsoever, and maybe there is no difference between a place and your mind. I mean, maybe you have several places inside of your mind.
Mhm.
So,
Well, the place that you observe that information, the phenomena, from, the arena, the platform is your mind. So, um, I mean, I understand your question. It would be along the lines of, well, when you look, through a telescope, are you seeing freestanding reality, or is it simply your brain on a telescope? So there is an objective reality out there that's a change in your perceptual ability, allows you, to perceive. um, yeah, I think with subjective experience, though, eyes closed, lying on the bed, is it real, or is it simply your brain on drugs? I think it is quite hard to tell right now. We just don't have the technology, let's say, to peer into parallel universes or dark matter, to corroborate what you are seeing in the screen of your mind with what you might be seeing on the screen of some kind of imaging device. Um, I think at this point, the more important thing is to make the most of those experiences, to be able to extract as much information as possible, from them, to be able, to recognize what you see, work with it, interact with it, and, get as much as you can out of it. You could ask personal questions, professional questions, more theologically or religiously oriented questions, and hopefully get answers, and then write those answers down, think about them, look at them, and you see if they're helpful.
Do you think it's better to do it intravenously or to, vape or, smoke it? What are your opinions just regarding dosage and being able to
Mhm.
control dosage.
Well, when you smoke anything like that, there's bound to be, lots of loss from coughing and incomplete inhalation. Yeah, and you get kind of disoriented after the first few puffs, and it's hard to like figure out the pipe and all that. Um, yeah, I mean, intravenous, obviously, you get all the drug. There's no waste. Speed wise, they're about the same. It starts within a few heartbeats. Intramuscular is slow. Might take a minute or two to start feeling anything. Yeah, and the duration might be closer to 45 minutes or an hour as compared to 20 or 25 when you smoke or inject it. Yeah, like if you're going to be using anything intravenously, you have to be super careful with the purity of the drug and the needles and all that. Yeah, so, yeah, I think it's, to each his own mostly.
So in a
Well, and if you want a, very slow DMT experience, then there's ayahuasca, obviously.
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah.
so in a clinical setting, is the setting like beanbag chairs and, trippy lighting, or is it like this sterile environment that looks like you're in a doctor's office?
Are you talking about my DMT studies?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yeah, those occurred, uh, in a hospital. An academic teaching hospital
Mhm.
on a research unit, that we shared with a experimental chemotherapy unit.
Mm.
Uh, so it was a pretty cool. It was a fairly austere environment. We got some upgrade in our room that we kind of monopolized for the studies. But still, we got a couple of nice chairs on a pretty headboard. But there were still tubes and pipes, coming out of the wall, behind the bed. Yeah, no, linoleum floor. Um, yeah, in the beginning, I was afraid that kind of environment would detract from the experience. But I'd say 99% of the time it was great because people were not worried about dying. They knew that they were in a hospital. There was a nurse on one side, a physician on another, a crash team, minutes away. So um, yeah, I think ultimately it became a reassuring environment. It was more, daunting and formidable when we started using psilocybin. To keep people in a little room like that on that kind
Oh,
of a
yeah.
ward for 6 or 8 or 10 hours, it
Yes.
just wasn't really working.
Yeah. I wanna wander around in the woods when I'm on psilocybin. I wouldn't wanna be in a hospital room.
No, no, either with music, no music. It's just a small room.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have your eyes open and you want to interact, you want to move around, and that just wasn't possible.
Yeah. I could see that. Well, to go back to your book, in the title, which I was surprised to read when I first read it, trauma was in there. What role did trauma play in your journey and maybe in your eventual curiosity about altered states of mind?
Um, yeah, that's a complicated issue. Well, the um, the family that I was raised in, my dad was was an alcoholic, and it lowered his inhibitions, regarding physical punishment.
Mm.
So I was spanked, beat up a bit. Um, yeah, and like at a very early age, I needed to contend with a state of mind, which was being hit.
Mhm.
So in retrospect, I think I experimented with a number of responses to being hit. Like I could cry, or I could grit my teeth, or I could just, I could try to dissociate, to be calm, to be mellow, those kinds of things. So as a small kid, yeah, I mean, your powers of concentration aren't strong enough to, be able, to meditate while that's going on. Um, yeah, so I y- began experimenting in a way with my own mind, back then as a way to cope with pain and unpredictability. Those kinds of qualities of a household like that. Yeah. And so I was really a straight kid, like smart and athletic and popular and all that. Um, so I was able, to get by with the support and the feedback from school, and I, didn't spend as much, time home as I could have. My best friend lived down the street. I spent all my spare time there. But once I, went away to college, I, lost all of that, social support, which was, buttressing me, uh, to help with, dealing with, the traumatic qualities of my household. So I was quite, keen to experiment with altering, my consciousness.
Sure.
And as we were talking about earlier, I didn't really find alcohol all that beneficial or pleasant.
Mhm.
But the first time I smoked cannabis, I was 17 or so, and it was just a fully ecstatic psychedelic experience. I was happy. I wasn't self-critical. I was relaxing. I was discovering all these things in the music. And thought, and it, yeah, well, I started college as a chemistry major. When I was younger, I liked making fireworks and bombs. And so I started college as a chemistry major, hoping to start my own line of fireworks.
Wow.
And I was discouraged, obviously. But that first cannabis experience seemed to me to be an example of chemistry. Like here's chemistry in action. I'm not making bombs or fireworks, but there's all this really amazing stuff occurring
Mhm.
as opposed to a change in brain chemistry. Um, so in some ways, the die was cast on a couple of levels. One was I want to understand how this occurred. What is going on in the brain that things can change quite so radically. And the other consequence was that I wanted more and more of those kinds of experiences, which led me to a number of catalysts, which I describe in the book.
Did you notice that how you responded to your father? You mentioned 3 different states or 3 different potential, reactions that you had. Did you notice that your reactions influence or affected the spanking, or did it have no effect whatsoever?
Oh, yeah, like each of the three potential responses was predicated on I hope this shortens and
Right.
lessens what's going on. Yeah, so it was important to cry. So if I didn't cry, that was no good. And I wasn't strong enough, to dissociate. So
Mm.
mostly I just cried and just grinned and well and waited for it to pass.
My father was also an alcoholic, and my mother experienced manic depression throughout my childhood, so I can definitely relate to using different uh, modes and modalities to try to deal with that. My primary issue was neglect because my father traveled a lot, so he was gone. We had this pendulous relationship where he would be good for about 2 weeks, and then he would get the bug to get out of the house and get away. And so, I found the same exact experience where I tried alcohol because he was an alcoholic, and I didn't really like that experience, and I had a best friend who was a cannabis smoker from the time she was 12 years old, maybe even younger. And it was such a relief to have some distance from my pain that I was really drawn to cannabis. And then I've
Uh-huh,
spent 40 plus years on and off using it because I felt like it put a veil between myself and my trauma.
uh-huh,
Um, but the thing that I found so interesting is that with the meditation is that there is it almost feels like, the air has been released from an overfilled balloon, and I just feel this sense of a ease or a pressure release that I've never experienced before with cannabis. In my experience, it felt like I was just avoiding the potential that I would eventually have to deal with. And so
Mhm.
it kind of put something between me and my pain, me and my partner. And I don't know, I think that the survival skill we have as humans is to try to find things to make us feel better, and we do what works.
Mhm.
Sometimes what
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Do you remember the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa?
Mhm. Oh,
Mhm.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a quote from one of his books which I have never been able, to locate. But he didn't encourage marijuana use, because he believed it was like meditation.
Mm.
Uh, and you would feel like you were meditating because you were in the moment, but it was because of no short-term memory. That's why you're in the moment. But I think still no short-term memory feels good in a lot of ways. So that was his critique of cannabis smoking. I think also it's a replacement for psychotherapy,
Mhm.
and it could be a reasonable compromise at the same time. Like you can develop insights,
Mhm.
and you can write things down. You can remember things that you may have forgotten. You can make emotional contact with certain parts of your life that you weren't able to before. But it's more state specific. I mean, you're there and you get those insights when you're stoned and they kind of evaporate when you come down, so you need to, repeatedly
Mhm.
be stoned. I wrote a book review years ago on a book called Living High,
Mm.
and it was about big time pot smokers. They just smoked from morning until bedtime, uh, and I concluded that it was a reasonable compromise for these folks between expensive long-term psychotherapy and not
Mhm.
doing anything at all. And I got some, grief, for making that recommendation, and, but I think it's true. It can help in some ways, and it's much easier, than long-term therapy.
I totally agree. What are your thoughts about this normalization of psychedelics? Like, this idea of psilocybin shops sprouting up all over neighborhoods. Would you recommend, just the average citizen?
I mean, how could I? On so many levels. Yeah, I mean, clearly there needs to be increased access.
Mhm.
But I think mushroom shops. Yeah, it's just kind of reckless, and you're asking for trouble. You're asking for adverse effects. You're asking for emergency room visits and inpatient visits. You're asking for a backlash,
Mm.
and the ostensible medicalization thing, like it's a healing center as opposed to a place to buy drugs to get high and have fun.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit I'm ingenuous. I think with the cannabis legislation which evolved over time,
Mhm.
it began um, for medicinal use, but the long term goals were to open it up to recreational use. And I think that would be the same mindset that is driving a lot of this legalization, decriminalization. There needs to be increased access, but I think it needs to be regulated, needs to be vetted, needs to be like, really, cross all your T's and, dot all your I's. Uh, regulated drugs, good therapists if you want therapy, good spiritual folks if you want to work on your spirituality, creativity. You could have, workshops and whatnot. But I think you really need to screen people. You need to, vet people. You need to vet the therapists. Um, you make certain, that the drugs are sterile and pure and what they are supposed to be. So, I think legalization and decriminalization is a little too Wild West. I was up in Denver a few months ago at a psychedelic cup, and
Mhm.
it was a competition for who grows the strongest mushrooms, who
Wow.
grows the strongest pot, who
Wow.
grows the strongest San Pedro, and there's like chocolate bonbons with a pretty good dose of psilocybin in them, which are like candy. You have two of them, and you would have to sit down. So I think that maybe I'm no- y- well, I'm afraid that. With increased access there and with unregulated increased access, there's going to be increased mortality, morbidity out there.
Mhm. What I find fascinating, especially in the cannabis realm, is the use of pesticides and how people may be getting high off of the pesticide and not necessarily the cannabis. And so the regulation there, it seems like there's kind of a missed opportunity to really start growing organic, indoor cannabis and really, the bespoke artisanal cannabis should be maybe more normal than how it was when I was a teenager and you were getting ditchweed that God only knows what was being sprayed on it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, know your source.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. There are lots of um, legitimate, responsible, mindful cannabis growers out there.
Yeah, I think the having the mushroom shops would be different in a culture where there was more of a tradition or a lineage of responsible and respectful usage of these plants. But just having it be another thing on the marketplace of recreational substances is a dangerous pursuit because some people are going to want to take it and take lots of it and go to an amusement park and maybe freak out and have a horrible
Hmm.
time of it, as opposed to doing something a little more insightful. Maybe use it to cultivate your awareness or expand your consciousness or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that any experience like that is a combination of the set, who you are, what's your intention,
For
the
sure.
setting,
Yes.
which is where you do it and with who.
Hmm.
And it's important to also think about the dose. Like if you want to go to an amusement park, you take a small dose.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
If but you have to think about it to make certain that you're optimizing all the variables.
Mm,
If you want an insightful experience, you would do it indoors at a higher dose.
mm,
Take a walk with some friends. It would be perhaps in between.
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah. Indeed.
So, can you describe your first experience? Like, what was the trajectory after cannabis?
Well, the next thing I really dove deep into was psychedelics, especially frequent use of LSD. So yeah, I started. It was just a few months after that, probably. Yeah, it was interesting. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 1960s,
Mhm.
which God willing will not burn down.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it was middle class Jewish friends and community, and we were a really straight group. No one smoked, no one drank, no one smoked pot. Um, certainly, no one was you're taking psychedelics. Um, so I felt like I had a lot of um, work to make up for. So I just dove into psychedelics with a passion after those positive cannabis experiences. Yeah, so that's what I mostly focused on, I guess, for the next number of years. Um, I didn't well, after one especially frightening LSD experience, stopped taking psychedelics. I described that in the book as a chapter called "Permanent Insanity,"
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah.
and it was quite scary.
It sounds like
Yeah,
it.
and I said, "I don't think I wanna take any more psychedelics for a while."
Yeah.
Yeah, and I stopped for a number of years, and I resumed when I moved to New Mexico in the 1980s. There was a research group, that was um, taking new and old psychedelics, and so I got back into it. Then a few years later, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, the whole gamut, some experimental drugs. Um, yeah, so my first acid experience was at a party at a girls' dorm.
Hmm.
And everybody was flirting, and I was completely out of my element. I was like, as I was describing earlier, I like making fireworks and bombs. I wasn't much into girls.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so yeah, I found a room where the food was, and sat down on a bed in that room, and it was a pile of fried chicken, and it just made me laugh that people were eating fried chicken. And I was interacting with the students who were, going up to get the fried chicken, and I said, "That's fried chicken, don't you?" And and you're going to eat that, right? And people are looking at me like, "What the hell?" Yeah, and I just could not stop laughing. I just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. Yeah, and at a certain point, somebody, came in who was a little more frightening, and I felt this interesting swinging between sheer ecstatic laughing, bliss and abject terror. How the strength is kind of generic in a way, and the the valence, the quality can vary widely. Yeah, but thankfully, it was a friend, and he asked me how I was doing, and I told him, and yeah, that moment of fear passed rather quickly. Yeah, and but I was really intrigued. I had never laughed so hard in my life. Uh, yeah, so yeah, and a week later, my friend and I, went up to the mountains in the snow on LSD, and it was a completely different, but yeah, similarly, very profound experience.
Did the exploration into Buddhism and TM occur sort of in the middle of that psychedelic period or before or after?
Um, well, my first flash of the potential of enlightenment, what's called bodhicitta, occurred on that second LSD experience in the mountains in the snow with my friend. It it was a realization that there was a different way of looking at everyday reality
Mhm.
that was based in everyday reality, but the apprehension of it, the understanding and the interacting w- with it on its basis, its importance, those kinds of things, wasn't quite what I had believed it was. It was just a flash of lightning, more or less, and I didn't work on it as much as just kind of being, I guess, directed by it. So I took a course. Well, I'm actually I learned transcendental meditation as a junior in college, and I was taking a lot of LSD, and I was getting a little concerned about my mental health. So
Mm.
I stopped. Yeah, and I figured, well, I'll learn meditation. Um, and I did, and back then my constitution, it really didn't take. But in the meantime, I took a class on Indian Buddhism, and it answered all my questions, cognitively, that had been stirred up but had been kind of forgotten over, as a result of that first flash of the potential for an enlightened perspective. So I just loved Buddhism. I just went crazy over it. I was just I was, yeah, kind of insufferable. Like, this makes more sense than anything I've ever read. Yeah. So,
Same
um,
here.
yeah, but I was, simply just reading books. I didn't really start practicing until a few years later.
Mhm. What are your thoughts? I got the impression for somehow from reading your book that you no longer practice TM meditation. If whether or not that's the case, what is your take on that form of meditation?
Oh, yeah, I just, practiced it for maybe a year or so. Um, yeah. Oh, well, the reason that I didn't get more involved was I wasn't that drawn to the Bhagavad Gita, which we were studying. I just seemed not quite my cup of tea. And we listened, or we watched videotapes of the Maharishi, and I wasn't that drawn to him.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
understand.
so I still, practiced,
Uh-huh.
the mantra. Yeah, but once I learned about Buddhism, that's a good question whether or not I continued doing TM for those years before I learned to sit in zazen. I probably just stopped TM after I left college. I went through a very severe depression my first year of the medical school, and I have a couple of chapters regarding that episode of mood disorder. So once I dropped out of medical school, I was really desperate for some cure, some fix, some healing. Yeah, and I ended up at a Zen monastery for a month or two. Yeah, and I learned Zen meditation,
Yeah, I can
and my depression just went away at
Mm,
one afternoon.
mm,
fabulous. Yeah, I can relate to not being that we're not we took TM, she learned TM at the Maharishi, and then I later learned it at the local center here, and I'm not really drawn to the Bhagavad Gita, either, and I would much rather listen to Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche talk than I would the Maharishi. Um, but the practice itself, I've found to be very beneficial, but it's different than the Tibetan Buddhist meditation that I have practiced before.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, once I learned Zen meditation, it's quite simple. There's no mantra. You just kind of are there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I usually just use the mantra at the very beginning until my mind sort of settles, the sediment settles in my mind, and then I just go somewhere else. Like,
Mhm.
that's just sort of the entry to a specific state of mind, and then I just kind of leave it behind and do my own thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a useful kind of a tool,
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like. Um, so I still meditate every night, and the first minute or two after you said um, I sit myself down. I'm on the cushion. I'll use my breath. Count to 10, start over for a few minutes. To get comfortable on the cushion and work on your breathing and whatnot.
Yeah. Which is surprisingly hard to do to sometimes to keep doing that until 10, like you kind of
Mhm.
forget sometimes what number you're on or like it's so funny
Oh,
how
constantly. Yeah,
yeah.
it's scathing indictment of our powers of
Yeah,
concentration.
exactly. Uh, did you have
I
anywhere you
just
wanted to
I
go?
what I find so beautiful about your journey is that you have this sense of curiosity that you've not landed in one place and been very, like, planting your flag in the ground and saying, "This is the way." You keep kind of
Mhm.
pushing yourself, and I think that's an important aspect of being human, because what serves you in one point of your life may not serve you in another point, and it's easy to get static and kind of avoid growing, but you keep pushing. Do you see that as, uh, being just a form of healing your your body or healing your spirit? Is that what kind of keeps you propelling forward?
Um, I'm not sure. It's an intellectual curiosity. Like I love to read and think and synthesize different models. That's just my nature. Um, yeah, and I suppose to the extent that working on your intellect helps you heal, I suppose that, there's, been healing involved. I've, gone through a number of, methods, for healing, independent of, study, like,
Mhm.
psychotherapy and psychedelics,
Mhm.
meditation. Um, yeah, but I, never really studied, um, meditational texts per se. Is more of a practice. And even though the type of, therapy I've had over the years was Freudian psychoanalytic, I didn't study Freud. So the two are kind of separate. The intellectual, I think, feeds the more spiritual, abstract part of what I'm seeking. The therapeutic, meditative, I guess. Have been more physical and emotional. Yeah, like I like to read the Hebrew Bible and the commentaries. Um, yeah, I've got a 1,200-page translation and commentary on the book
Wow.
of Genesis right now.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
kind of wrapping up. I'm not sure when what I'm going to uh, to do with it.
Uh-huh.
But there's a lot of information gleaned over a lot of years of really an in-depth study of the Hebrew Bible. So I don't read the Hebrew Bible for therapeutic purposes. They're more intellectual and spiritual. Yeah, career-wise, it's been kind of interesting. In terms of responding to my curiosity. Like I began looking for altered states, biological concomitants with with the pineal gland,
Mhm.
and that's a, y- um and that was a melatonin study,
Mm.
and we discovered there weren't any psychedelic effects of melatonin, so I went off to the DMT study,
Mhm.
uh, and then the DMT study wound down, and I got and I received an answer from doing that study, to an important, y- personal question, both academic and personal, which was, is there anything inherently spiritual in the pharmacology of the drug?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like if you just gave the drug, would people have a spiritual experience or become more spiritual?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And the answer was no. So, what next? Well, what is spiritual? If you can't become or focus or work on spiritual things with a drug, in and of itself, where else do you go? So you go, to a religion if you're so inclined and start, delving into that. And I'm Jewish, and like to read, and the Jews like to write. So I have a huge amount of commentaries that I just have been working through for 20, 25 years now. Yeah, and it sustains me spiritually, but the healing part has been more or less independent of that. I suppose to the extent you can call them independent.
Do you think that you mentioned that, uh, alcohol has almost a sentience to it? Would you say the same for cannabis or LSD, psilocybin, DMT, or any psychedelic?
Um, I think the ones that are biologically originating, if they're made in a lab or they're straight from the plant, I think it's more that they're found in nature and have been taken in a natural setting. I think those may possess a little more of a personality. Like ibogaine or ayahuasca, as compared to LSD. You don't really hear about the spirit behind
Yeah,
LSD,
Mhm.
uh,
exactly.
or the spirit behind MDMA. At least most of the time,
Mhm.
it's more of an emotion.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I think with the ones which occur in the natural world. Yeah, cannabis too, obviously, I think.
It would be curious if the person that was manufacturing the LSD or the MDMA was saying mantras or praying over, uh, the drug as they were making it, if that would have some type of an effect. That would be an interesting thing
Mhm.
to track.
Yeah, yeah, it could. My guess is it would be a, subtle effect.
Mm,
Mhm. Okay, we talked about the increased accessibility of things like psilocybin these days, but as of the last probably 10 years, close to 10 years, there's been a sort of a renewed psychedelic renaissance. What what are your thoughts about that? And do you think that in any way your research in the spirit molecule had anything to do with that?
Um, well, the study at the University of New Mexico in the 90s was the first new American study with these compounds, since the passage of the Controlled Substances Act, which occurred in 1970. Yeah, and we gave our first dose of DMT in November 1990. So 20 years had elapsed. Before any new clinical studies with these compounds took place. Yeah, and I spent 2 years working out a system of doing Schedule One research with humans. It was very difficult, to get the FDA and the DEA, to be on the same page and to
mhm.
get them talking with each other and expedite the approval of the project. So all of the subsequent studies which occurred after mine utilized the template that we had developed of doing a Schedule One study with people. Yeah, there was a University of Arizona study, giving psilocybin for OCD. There is a couple MDMA studies, Wayne State and UCLA, and there was an ibogaine study in Florida. Yeah, and then I helped the Hopkins guys get up and running as well. With the model and our grants and whatnot. Yeah. Um, well, most of that was occurring under the radar until the Hopkins folks began publishing, and then Michael Pollan got interested in their work. Yeah, yeah. So things, that first mystical experience, yeah, psilocybin study from Hopkins, I think, came out in 2006, and I, wrapped up my studies in '95. But the mystical part, I think, you really spurred interest within the media and the greater public. And Michael Pollan's work, obviously, he's extremely popular. Yeah, So I think it was kind of a bubble. There is a little bit of a release of air from that bubble. The MDMA maps Lycos project didn't get accepted as an NDA, new drug application. Um, and I think there is more attention being paid to adverse effects, which aren't anywhere as fun to read about as healing
Mhm.
stories.
Yeah.
And the results of therapeutic work. They're strong, and they're positive, but they're not quite where they need to be, for an approved application of a new drug. Um, and I think in the meantime, there's a belief that psychedelics are going to heal everything and make you a happier, better person. And that's the motivations behind increased accessibility at the state level, or um, so I think we're getting a dose of realism. Oh, and the immediate venture capital returns aren't materializing. There may not be as much money to be made as was initially thought, or as quickly, anyway. Um, Yeah, so I think it's, getting a bit, more balanced. There's a lot of people doing, psychedelic research.
Mhm.
So even if, they're the recreational part or the in the field, a little more casual use is, clamped down on. I think there's still, quite a bit, momentum within the research world.
And what kind of research and what is your part in that research is DMTX doing? I know it's about the extended DMT state, but are you advising on that or are you taking part in any of the experiments?
No, yeah, but I, was consulting with the Imperial College Group in London
Mhm.
with, their extended, DMT experiments. Yeah, I've been, more involved, with that group. There's also a group in Basel that has been doing extended DMT work, and there's a group at UC San Diego about to begin an extended DMT project.
And
Yeah, the DMTX project in Boulder. I don't know a lot about. I think they're extracting and purifying and sterilizing botanical DMT,
mhm.
and it's a infusion through a vein.
Mm.
Not sure how long they're going. At least an hour, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of safeguards
Mhm.
built into the project.
Sure. I think that would have to be such a different experience because you're going to come on a lot slower and you're going to get more of a chance to sort of configure yourself into that
Hmm.
reality and maybe become a little more comfortable with not being death by astonishment but more being able to take it in bite-sized chunks as opposed to just getting blasted for 10 minutes and then coming back immediately.
Yeah. Well, there's a debate, or like it still, it still has not been fully worked out. Do you need to begin with a bolus, like a big shot,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and then slower, constant infusion, or or do you simply begin with a constant infusion and you gradually ramp up? I think the consensus is building, that if you really want to get out there, you need to give a bolus first.
Mm.
Hmm.
But it may not be as big a bolus as just a single dose.
Gotcha.
On a toilet.
No comment. Well, yeah,
Feel
yeah,
free.
yeah. I just have to ask what you were thinking.
I know, I know.
I don't think she
It's
has an
a very
answer.
humbling experience, and it's certainly humbling to share with you. uh, I do wonder what your thoughts about using psychedelics in conjunction with talk therapy. Uh, I think that there's probably a subjective answer there that it just depends on the person and what's presenting, what the pathology is. Would you recommend that someone maybe be in therapy before they go into the psychedelic world, or do you think that it's okay for teenagers to experiment with psychedelics? I mean, I think I was 16 when I first did psilocybin. Um, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it also well, I think it's another case in point regarding the importance of the set and uh, in the setting and the dose. Um, you want to optimize your set. So you want to be emotionally healthy, you're psychologically healthy, physically healthy, spiritual healthy, if that's important to you. So you want to get all of your ducks in the row that you can. The setting would be, what is your intention? Are you going to be by yourself? You can be with friends. You can be in the city. In the city.
Mhm.
And the dose. Is it going to be a small, medium, or a big dose? Back in the day when they were first using LSD in psychotherapy, there was a model called the psycholytic model, which was part of your ongoing treatment, most usually psychoanalysis. and you would take a small dose of LSD, and that would stimulate the transference and the emergence of unconscious material, like an emotional connection, to your memories, retrieving suppressed memories. So you were doing talk therapy in the midst of an LSD experience, although it was a lower kind of LSD experience. The other model was what was called back then the psychedelic model. You give one or two big doses,
Mm,
and you don't really spend a lot of time talking with people during the experience itself. You've got music, you've got eye shades, and you go inside. There isn't a lot of interacting. If you do start interacting, you're encouraged to put the eye shades and the headphones back on, and you'll talk about it later.
mm,
But those are much larger doses,
mhm,
and they don't usually occur in the context of ongoing psychotherapy.
mm.
You go to a center, you are recruited, you do the experience after 10 to 12 sessions of preparation and of supportive therapy, establishing a therapeutic relationship. But usually after you're done, you're on your own. You could either continue in therapy if you were beforehand, but there isn't any long term kind of therapeutic follow up.
I could see the benefit. I know that it was used MDMA was used in couples therapy, and I could definitely see the benefit of that, just to kind of crack people open.
Yeah, well, I have an interesting MDMA couples, therapy story. My wife and I back then, I'm divorced now, and I had to have, paid, more attention, I suppose, back then. Was we took MDMA, for the first time together, one day, and we did not really dig each other. I went into my room doing my thing. She went into her studio, doing her thing, and we reconnected 6 hours later. But I thought to myself, that's weird. Aren't you supposed to feel like way closer with your spouse on
Mhm.
MDMA? Yeah. So
Interesting.
Wow.
I ought to have read the writing, the writing on the wall back then.
Yes.
It's interesting because our sons are 15 and 17, and neither have ever had a drink, and both have said that they have no interest whatsoever in experiencing any kind of a hallucinogen, alcohol, cannabis, any of it. And I wonder if that's a rebellion against us because we have been very open about sharing those experiences and not stigmatizing them, but they don't
Yeah, yeah.
really, and both of them have friends. They're at the age where they have friends who are smoking cannabis or drinking, and they've both kind of commented on how their friends' behavior changes in those states. So for me, I think I had so much childhood trauma, early sexual trauma, early childhood trauma, that I needed something. I needed some help to deal with that, where they don't really have any trauma, so they're not really looking for any kind of a release valve.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I think also, yeah, certain things do skip a generation.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
their kids,
exactly.
maybe heads big time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure. Uh, I know that it was, or that I don't know whether I just saw a clip that Danny Goler posted about you, something with your interview or your conversation with Joe Rogan, and his work was mentioned. Danny Goler. What do you think
Right.
of what seems to have found in the DMT space?
Yeah. Well, can you describe to me, what he's
Sure.
found? Because I haven't looked into it all that carefully, to
Mhm.
be honest.
He has had multiple years of experiences with DMT, and they seem to be cumulative in the sense that if a being contacts him during that experience, they continued to throughout the length of his experiences to the present day. He now says that he sees something called the console that he titles the console, and it's sort of like like a console with different sorts of, tech objects and screens and so on and so forth. And it's there every time that he goes back to the DMT space. Well, he was, I believe, if I remember the story correctly, compelled by one of these beings that he met, along with a series of synchronous circumstances that he had around the same time, to get a specific type of laser, point it at a wall at a certain distance so that the ray is wide enough to be able to see it. And in I think he says after having a breakthrough DMT experience and you're coming down, you take a little more, but not enough to go back into the breakthrough experience. And you look into this laser, and he says that he has seen code, almost like computer
Mhm.
code, almost like the Matrix in the sense that it's symbols, but it's not a recognizable symbol or a group of symbols. And he has uh, implored other people to try this out, replicate the experience. Yeah, some who he's front loaded, and many who he's not front loaded, and many people have reported seeing the same thing.
Mhm.
Is that what does that sound like to you?
Uh, it sounds like, yeah, something in the occipital cortex, or the visual system, at some level. You might be one of the way stations between the eyes and the visual cortex. Yeah, sounds neurophysiological.
He says he claims that he has tested it in the sense of getting up and moving around, and that the way that his relationship to the code that he's seeing is that it has, I think the term that he uses is something that he's drawn from a book, I believe, objectness. Like,
Mhm.
it maps out to be its own object because he can sort of, in a sense, walk around it, and it maintains perspective, if that makes any sense.
I can imagine it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm not certain what the significance of that would be.
Okay. Just curious. Yeah, if you had
Yeah,
any
well,
thoughts
like,
on it.
does that establish its objectivity?
He, in his mind, I believe without a doubt, he thinks that it does that. Yeah. That it has.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as opposed to his brain on drugs,
Yeah.
for example.
Well, he has said that he's come in contact with people who are able to see it not under the influence of DMT.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh, as a result of looking at this red laser?
Yes.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it seems to me some interaction. Oh, I see. So Danny describes, still being able, to see this even without the laser?
I
No,
no.
without the DMT.
Oh, without the DMT.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you subscribe to the importance of endogenous DMT in the brain, that would be an explanation for being able to perceive it without ingesting DMT.
He takes it as, sort of some sort of, evidence that there is perhaps some simulated aspect of reality, and that
Mhm.
is a peek into that code of the simulation.
Yeah. So, has anybody written this code, down to be able to start deciphering it?
Not to my knowledge. I know that it seems to be building momentum, and different people or different types of people are sort of gravitating towards this, but I'm not sure if anybody has done that yet. That should be a major part of it, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah, that would seem important.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, a week or two ago, maybe a little longer, Um, there was an issue of Jules Evans' newsletter, Ecstatic Integration, and it was written by a fellow named Edward Perdue, and it's a discussion of the Goler thing. And Ed spent a lot of time speaking with Andrew Gallimore about how to understand it. Yeah, and so that issue of ecstatic integration has a in-depth discussion. I'm more in line with Andrew, but that's because of our backgrounds and
Yeah,
training
sure.
and things.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, he does mention Andrew, in many interviews, and Andrew, as you probably well know, responded to him did a video
Uh-huh.
response that was almost as long as the interview that he's responding to. And then
Right.
Danny did a response to Andrew's response, all very polite and very respectful. But yeah,
Right.
interesting to see the give and take.
Yeah. Well, it would be of interest to know if this were a simulation, but I think it would also be the case that we would still be living our lives. There still would be, cause and effect. If this is a simulation, if I have a dry mouth, I'll drink water and my mouth isn't as dry.
Mm.
Yes.
Simulation or not, that's certainly what seems to be going on. So, yeah, it's a complicated
In,
topic.
indeed. Indeed. Yes. You could go down many rabbit holes.
I did just to add my perspective to the discussion. In my DMT experience, I did have Danny's laser because we just had him on the show. And that was part of my quote unquote experiment. And I had the laser pointed on the wall and I saw no code. I still saw the laser as part of the experience, but there was no hieroglyphic. Some people have said that it looks like Japanese
Uh,
potentially, but I saw none of that. I still just saw the line, the red laser line.
Was that right before you were,
My mind exploded.
yeah, the onslaught of,
I think it was in the midst of all of that, of me trying to find some sense of reality.
but didn't you
yeah.
mention something like things were stripped away and
Yes,
there were
every
layers? Yeah.
yes,
What
yes.
were you going to say, Rick?
Oh, yeah. Well, you may not have been the ideal experimental subject.
No, no, I wasn't. It's certainly not the right setting.
Sitting, maybe, but not setting.
I am, it's so funny because as I read, uh, your first DMT book, I knew about the experiments that you were doing. I remember thinking, and this is long before I'd ever done it, I thought, "This is exactly the person I wanna do it with, and this is how I wanna do it," because it seems safe. It seemed exactly as you were describing that if something happened, there would be support around me in that situation.
Mhm.
In those experiments, did anyone ever have a bad experience that they needed some intervention?
Well, there were a handful of bad experiences. One guy on his first big DMT, dose experienced being raped anally by crocodiles. He was pinned to the bed, couldn't move. It was
Wow.
the most terrifying experience of his life. Yeah, so
There's
we
that.
spent more time with him. He came in a few times to my office to make, to make certain, that he was feeling all right. Yeah. There was someone whose blood pressure dropped like precipitously,
Mhm.
Wow.
and we had to, you move the bed around. Yeah, one guy developed panic attacks afterwards, and we had to spend some more time with him. Somebody was, driving home and felt like the world was coming to an end. Like
Mm,
he was convinced the world was coming to an end and he had to get home as fast as he could.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, like even, screening our volunteers as carefully as we did.
mhm.
A big DMT, dose is a big DMT dose. Like the high dose, that we used was 0.4 milligrams per kilogram. And every study since ours has been using zero point 0.3 milligrams per kilogram. So I think we may have just touched upon the this is almost too high a dose. So I think for safety's sake, a smaller dose is still fully psychedelic, but not quite as hair raising.
And what is the protocol in that situation when someone has this experience that seems so real or so terrifying to them? How do you, as a clinician, how do you handle that? What do you do?
Well, if they need support, you support them. If they need empathy, you're empathic. If they need to be, told to stop moving around, you tell them to stop moving around. Yeah.
Mm.
So, um, Yeah, the follow-up is important. Like, are they okay?
Hmm.
And if they're not okay, it is important to, follow up and, get them back on their feet. Y y we had Valium on, like, on the table next to us, and also, something, for hypertension.
Mm,
One of my old, mentors was a psychologist from the Bay Area named Leo Zeff. And, we were talking about, Valium one day, and he said, "Yeah, if things get really bad, you take the Valium." Yeah,
I love it.
yeah, yeah,
Oh.
so we never gave any Valium to the DMT subjects, no. Because it, passes, so quickly.
Hmm.
Mm,
And, we had, one fellow with, quite high blood pressure,
mm,
and, we were debating, gosh, should we give him an antihypertensive or not? But he calmed down, on his own.
Hmm.
mm.
Do you think that it's important that somebody who is conducting research like you, as you did, has had some sort of personal experience with the substance that's being experimented with?
Yeah, well, you would think so, at first blush, because they're more empathic, they can give informed consent, they are familiar with the territory.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, and it would seem to be a very easy study to do. You could compare outcome in a therapeutic protocol, uh, in a in the setting of an experienced psychotherapist, one who has experimented or taken the drug being used, as compared to a similarly uh, trained naive therapist. And that kind of study would not be difficult to do. But so far, I haven't ever seen us, that, that particular, study's results. But when you think about it as well, it may not be as obvious as we, think it might be at first glance. Because if you're experienced with, the drug in question, you may want to impose your pre-existing beliefs
mhm,
Sure.
onto the patient.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, "Oh, that's not what's happening, this is happening," because that's my experience, but that may not be the case, for that person. Like a choice of music, for example.
Mhm.
That
mhm,
music may be important to you because of your previous experiences, but it may be discordant with them.
mhm,
So I don't think it may be, quite as clear cut as, "Oh, yeah, I know the territory and I can help you better than,
Mhm.
somebody that doesn't." I think, a naive, therapist, if they're, a good therapist, would remain open, to doing whatever, is required, for the situation.
What do you opine is the future for psychedelics with government involvement, with the legalization of psychedelics, across the board? Do you think that that is going to be beneficial, or, do you think that there's a cautionary tale to be had in that?
Well, yeah, well, like as we were discussing earlier, I, believe it's important, to increased access, to allow more people who may benefit from psychedelics to take psychedelics, but it has to be regulated. There needs to be pure drug, good therapists, quality control, peer review. Yeah, everything needs to be, done very carefully. These are very powerful drugs and should not be, treated casually. Yeah, so if it is going to be, the government, I think, the government has responsibility to regulate it. It can't be a free for all. But there isn't only medical use. I mean, there can be spiritual use. So I think it, behooves us to think about, the religious models, as
Mhm.
well. Would it be anybody who puts together a church and says they want to be exempt because they're a church, or is it like a subgroup within an established religion with the blessing of that established of the established religion, or is it a splinter religious group? Yeah, yeah. So the religious practice element still needs to be worked out. I don't think that's been worked out as carefully as or as far along as the medical use has. And I think, there ought to be, wellness, potential, for psychedelics, creativity and fun, couples work, outdoor work.
Mhm.
But I think it needs to be, monitored carefully. Like there's all these retreat centers, and some of them are not doing good work.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, and mail order ketamine. You can now mail order injectable ketamine. So
Wow.
I
Wow.
just don't think that bodes well for the field. I
Yeah.
think the more loose you play, the more problems are going to develop.
And unlike a lot of these substances, something like ketamine is addictive. Like
It's
John Lilly.
addictive. People die on it if they take too
Yeah.
much.
John Lilly got obsessively addicted to ketamine.
Yeah,
Strange.
I have a friend who drowned in a pool on ketamine.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's what happened to Matthew Perry too. So
Ah, I didn't know that. Well, we were talking earlier about certain substances having a spirit, and you mentioned things like LSD, probably less likely to be that way. But what do you think about the synthesization of substances, like psilocybin or something like that? Something's going to get lost in that translation if it's not the real deal, right?
oh, I'm not sure. Like DMT is DMT. Like you inject DMT from a lab and you smoke DMT that's botanical, and I don't think you could tell the difference.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um, I think, if you're going to take psilocybin mushrooms, there's all other kinds of components in the mushroom other than psilocybin. So well, like cannabis, like it's an entourage effect. There's the THC and all the terpenes,
Mhm.
uh, and other cannabinoids. Yeah, and I think in the case of taking a botanical psychedelic within the botanical carrier, that there's a number of other compounds which contribute to the effect. I think there's no MDMA in nature, so synthesized MDMA versus botanical
Yeah,
MDMA, it's not really a question.
for sure. Let's see. Are you working on any other books or projects right now?
The main project is this translation and commentary of Genesis. It's
Wow.
this monstrous thing. Like huge monstrous. It's almost kind of a monster too, but yeah, it's just huge. So I'm about finished with the first draft of the book. Like I have read everything I'm going to read. I've written everything. I've written everything down which I could possibly use. So now is the editing of the big version. Once I've got a good big version, I'll work on a much shorter condensed version, which I think will find some audience. A 1,300 page translation commentary won't find much of an audience. But I think a well done 200 page translation with commentary would be of interest. Like everybody's talking about the Bible now. Jordan Peterson has a new book on the Bible.
Yeah,
Mhm.
The Bible, and what's going on in the federal government is in lots of ways Bible oriented. So
Mhm.
I think what is written in the Bible is very important to understand, because we can refute what other people are saying it is saying,
Mhm.
and you can in a way turn the tables on those folks. You could say that's not what the Bible is actually saying. If you read it, it means this. So and I think spiritually too. I think people aren't quite as enamored of Zen or Hinduism or whatnot. Even shamanism, I think, is still kind of peripheral,
Mhm.
especially compared to Bible oriented religions. So I think that people who hail from Bible oriented religions, you would be interested in a common sense, plain meaning, translation of the Book of Genesis. Like I think in a lot of ways you can condense, the entire Hebrew Bible into Genesis. Everything is there, and there's no law. The Mosaic law begins in Exodus and extends out to the rest of the Bible. But Genesis has no law other than circumcision. And take that as you will. But the lives of the patriarchs are the meat, the substance of the text. So I think we can learn a lot of how to live a life that's connected with the creator of the universe, by following the or by I'm examining carefully the lives of those figures, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and Judah, and Joseph. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on for a long time, and I'm finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Do you find any citations or any examples of the use of psychedelics of any kind in Genesis?
No, no, there's no use of exogenous substances in the Bible other than wine and strong wine. That's it. At least as far as the text is actually saying.
It's interesting because I can remember kind of in the beginning days of my, use of cannabis where people, when you're high and you're in a group of people and you're having a conversation where people would posit that the anointing oils that were being talked about were actually cannabis. So I've just always been
Hmm.
curious about that.
Yeah. Um, well, that could be. It isn't in the text. So there's a number of ingredients in the anointing oil. Um, so the one which people are claiming as cannabis, sounds like cannabis.
Mhm.
The Hebrew word. But also it could be translated sweet cane. Kana bosem.
Mhm.
Kana is a cane, and Yabosum is a spice, or fragrant, so you can say it sounds like cannabis, but if you translated the words as they appear elsewhere throughout the text, kana is cane, Yabosum is fragrant. You could actually dispense with looking for exogenous agents by pointing to the presence of DMT in the brain.
Mm.
So you don't really need to look for ergot alkaloids in the manna or DMT in the burning bush or whatnot.
Mhm.
The DMT. There is DMT in the human brain. Uh, well, in the rodent brain, and that's been quite well established. The enzymes in the rodent and in the human are quite comparable.
Mhm.
But we know for certain there is measurable DMT in rather high quantities in the rodent brain. So if the brain is making this compound, it will go up and it will go down. Depending on the situation. So I think you could just, point to DMT, which we know about, rather than speculating about things that are just speculation at this point.
So, is it possible that these experiences were perhaps easier to access because of the lack of kind of ambient noise that we have now? So, we have cell phones and internet and all of these things that maybe create interference with us. And in antiquity, these things didn't exist. So, do you think it would potentially be easier to have these what could be considered heightened or enlightened experiences in antiquity?
Um, it could be. There was an anthropologist, I think, out there named Janes, Julian Janes,
Mhm.
who wrote a book about the bicameral
Yes.
mind.
Yeah, yeah.
And he proposed that back in the day, everybody heard a voice,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and it was their sense of self, which which was being externalized.
Mm.
And in a way, this voice was saying, "You tie your shoes. It's time for dinner. You go to bed. Go to work." Those kinds of things. Yeah, and then as culture changed because of geological events and atmospheric
Mhm.
ones, the sense of self became internalized, and you stopped hearing that voice.
Mm,
There isn't any evidence, at least, biologically, but there's a lot of interesting anthropological, scriptural
Yeah.
kinds of ideas which support that. Um, yeah, ambient light, the pineal, if it is involved at all in making psychoactive substances, the more light, the smaller the pineal gland. And yeah, obviously, if you're inured to a stressful kind of environment all day long, every day, your brain's going to be a bit more kind of worn down than may have been the case before.
mm,
Yeah, one day one of the volunteers in the DMT uh, study came out of the intoxication, and they asked, well, couldn't you do this through meditation? And I kind of said, well, good luck. Drugs are much more reliable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can, like anybody can do them,
Mhm.
like, you troubled people, bad people. There's like a trade off there.
uh, Translating the book of Genesis in this very atheistic, materialist, reductionist society that we live in, the Bible and many holy books are written off as sort of fairy tales, fables, just stories, just a bunch of stories. How
Hmm.
literally do you yourself take the Bible? Do you think this is more of a historical document or more fables and stories?
Well, think it's a very precise description of a spiritual world, which seems to have a lot of substance, lots of consistency, coherency. A few years back, I recorded a number of YouTube videos, maybe 15, 20 minutes each, and it was about Genesis. And the title of one of the early videos was the world of the Hebrew Bible is as real as the DMT world.
mm,
In other words, there is this DMT world which everybody goes to, everybody visits. They experience the same kinds of effects. There are certain characters that come back every time you enter that space. There's rules, there's patterns, like there's light rules and movement rules, which seem unusual but consistent from experience to experience. Yeah, and I think the same can be said about the world of Genesis. It's as if it is real. And if you look at it, very carefully, especially the words and the language and the grammar, there's this whole world that opens up. Like, did the serpent speak to Eve? Well, yes, that's what it says in the text. The serpent spoke to Eve. Uh, and you work with that. You don't start interpreting it as like evil in the world or Eve's subconscious or some Jungian archetype or some Freudian hidden desires. It's the serpent spoke to Eve, and this is what the serpent said. And after that statement from the serpent, then Eve responded. So it's a real dialogue,
Yeah.
mm,
between a snake and a human standing next to this tree. So you can visualize it. I mean, it's happening. So what's going on exactly? What's the message there? That's the way that I kind of look at it. I'm extracting information from the text itself, rather than extracting information consistent with my pre-existing beliefs about what the text is saying.
Yeah.
What is the timeline for that book? When do you think it will be released?
Oh man, I'd say years.
Mm,
That's what.
Yeah, maybe a couple or three.
mm,
Mhm. Cool.
Yeah, the smaller version. The big version I'll just put on create space, and but the smaller version I think I'll look for y- uh for a publisher.
Mhm.
mm.
Cool. Well, we look forward to it. Uh, Before we leave, can you tell the people listening and watching maybe where they can find you and your work?
Sure. I have a website, rickstrassman.com.
Mhm.
and I answer all my emails that get filtered through there. You can order my books through my website as well. I will inscribe I and I will sign them.
We have
So
a link on our website, bookshop.org, and we'll put your book up there, and you can order it through there, and either order it through your local bookstore or sponsor a bookstore somewhere else, and
oh,
some of the
thank you.
money will go towards there. And yeah, so we'll put it up there for sure, and then
Right.
obviously it can be found on Amazon too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. That's a great cover. Yeah, yeah. I'm a friend in Birmingham, Alabama. Did this
yeah,
Merrily Chalice.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Well, the book is illustrated.
Mhm. Yeah, all the
There's
drawings are
you
great.
know I'm lying in a gutter in front of a
I love
girl's
it.
dorm.
I love it.
Um,
It's
let's
fantastic.
see. Oh, there's like we're camping in the redwoods, and you
So
get backed over
cool.
guy's mailbox on acid. Yeah, that was kind of scary.
That's
Yeah.
That's
So
great.
great.
yeah. The illustrations really add to the book.
Absolutely. Yes. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic book. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit and chat with us about it and many other interesting things. It's
Well,
great
thank
to,
you, Chris and Hunter. My
Hey,
pleasure.
thank
yes,
you. It was an honor and a privilege to meet you, and we
yes,
look forward to having you on the show again sometime
Okay.
very
Well,
soon.
yes, and best for 2025.
yeah.
Yes,
Same
exactly.
back,
Yes.
right back at you. And as you know,
Okay.
with
Good.
Riverside, just hang on until the video and the audio are uploaded and then
Oh,
shut your
right.
browser.
Right. I was about to shut the browser.
I'm glad I reminded you.
Yeah.
All right, Rick,
Alrighty.
thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your
Okay.
night.
All right,
Okay. You
farewell.
too.
Uh,
Take care. Okay. Bye bye.
that was fabulous.
It was fabulous,
Yeah.
and I like that Terrence was here with us
Yes, exactly.
in spirit, joining the conversation.
Mhm.
I did want to talk to him once he mentioned the Genesis book about Dr. Hillman's work
I thought about that too.
and hear what his thoughts are. He may or may not know about Dr. Hillman, but I'm always curious when people mention doing translations in the Bible and what their take is on that, and
Well,
maybe we could email him and ask him and send
yeah,
him something and see
or
what he has to say.
Moro Biglione. I always
Mhm.
fuck up his last name, but the Italian guy who actually translates the Hebrew version.
Yes.
Aman is the Greek, but yeah, so that might, I don't know if that would be something that he would be more familiar with, but it's just as crazy. I would love to have him on sometime, although we would need to have a translator too. But insane translations of the Bible, angels being robots and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, this does have some really beautiful, highly strange illustrations in it.
Yeah. It's such a really, really cool book, and like I said in the talk, I believe, if not beforehand, it was great that Rick read it too because, it's his story, and hearing him sometimes chuckle and, you could tell he was smiling when he was reading some of it. He knows where all those experiences are coming from. It's coming from him, and so it's only right that he was narrating his own book. It was just really charming and wonderful, and like I said, very courageous of him to put it all out there, even some stuff that's not so pretty.
Yeah, it's easy to when you're a medical doctor and you are renowned for doing experiments and being in a psychedelic space, it's easy to kind of keep the lab coat on. And the fact that he was so earnest and honest about his own family childhood trauma and being able to reveal that. It just says so much. I did wanna kind of circle back to that and ask him about the, aspect of his healing journey with his father, if he had ever been able to reconcile that relationship and maybe talk to his dad about, the corporal punishment and how that affected him as a child. Because I think that sometimes that's the missing piece when we're having these discussions is it's easy for someone, or maybe not easy, but uh, for someone to be candid about the abuse that they've experienced, and then to take it that next step and say, and yes, I was able to talk about this with my parent and kind of go through all of that with them and explain my side of that and listen to their side of it. Because I think that a lot of that stuff is generational. And so people who spank their kids were spanked or thought that that's kind of what you did, that that's how you raised your kids is, spare the rod, spoil the child. That was kind of an old way of thinking. And I think that it would be interesting to hear the resolution of that and where his mom was and all of that.
Yeah, I wanna say that that was never resolved, if I remember correctly from the book, unfortunately, and I don't for some reason, I'm drawing a blank on his mother's position and all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a painful subject,
yeah,
and especially if it wasn't resolved. It certainly was never resolved in my family. To this day, it hasn't been resolved, and so, um, I think the fact that he has been able to not even necessarily move past it, but to work on himself and to recognize, his own, issues with mental health and depression and be able to see that and be able to acknowledge that, I think that's really wonderful.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, yeah, and, a totally different book than the DMT or DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and the one that I always forget, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, which has a lot to do with the as he was kind of mentioning there towards the end, the DMT realm and the realm of sort of biblical prophecy and scripture and stuff like that, which I didn't vibe with as much as the Spirit Molecule, but it's still a very, I mean, some fantastic stuff was in that book too. So I highly recommend all of the 3 books that I've read of his.
Yes, he's great.
Yeah.
He's just very kind and
Yes.
thoughtful, and, there's the it's always interesting to speak to a clinician, and we don't do that a lot. We don't really talk to people in the medical field, and certainly not people who have done this type of research and work, and so it's great to hear someone that has that expertise be able to kind of dig into their own reality. And I
Yeah.
keep holding this up because I don't feel like we do this enough. Like, we don't really share people's work enough, the visual aspect of it. Um, but he's a extremely thoughtful and kind person, and I'm so glad that he has someone in his life, and so funny that that's kind of how we started the interview, was that he was on a podcast and he found love.
I wanna ask him about what that episode was, that particular episode, and listen to it and see if I can pick up on anything.
Yeah, I mean, now that we have her name, we can probably go back
I didn't write it
and
down, but
try to find it, but you did
yeah,
record it.
yeah, it is recorded. Yes, for sure, and
Uh,
we can always write him about it.
yeah, it would be great if it was a visual interview to be able to see their banter,
Mhm.
to see if we could pick out the moment
Exactly.
where love
The
blossomed.
spark was
Yeah,
ignited.
yeah. It was great.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it, and,
absolutely.
there it's hard to talk about hard things like my own experience, um, and I didn't want this to turn into a therapy session for me, but it really did help to hear him say, "What were you thinking?" Because to be honest, I think I approached that experience with a bit of audacity, like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I've done psychedelics
Yeah,
before, like, I know what this is gonna be. I'm gonna trip out and it'll be fine." Um, and so I didn't have a healthy reverence for DMT when I did it, and I think that's something that he was really clear about is, any type of public use, um, or, any use that somehow the government is involved in and regulation the government is involved in, it's really important that those things be taken seriously and that there aren't psilocybin shops on every corner or DMT shops on every corner because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't need to be taking DMT,
Exactly.
kind of on their own. And, my first psilocybin experience, I was 16 and it was in, I wanna say, like, February or March, and I skipped school. I took it in the daytime, and I skipped school with one of my friends, and we went to see Fantasia, and it was snowing outside, and it was a really beautiful, magical, safe experience that I had, um, and an amazing experience, but I wouldn't recommend, our 15 and 17-year-olds to go and take psilocybin in a snowstorm. Like, I just feel like that, like, as he said, it skips a generation. I think maybe it's not necessary.
If they're gonna come to it, they'll come to it for their own
Yeah.
reasons, not anything remotely resembling anything that we were. And before I did LSD for the first time, I researched the fuck out of that. Like, I got a hold of any book that I possibly could in our local library and in our school library, and so I wanted to, kind of go in as informed as one can be without actually experiencing it, and I think that that helped, actually. I knew somewhat what to expect, and I had a fucking blast. I thought I did it in my parents' basement. I never did that particular kind of LSD before. It was black pyramid. It was actually gel
Mhm.
would dissolve on your tongue.
Mhm.
I've only done blotter since then, and it was really, really visual, and it was very, very much fun, very magical.
Yeah, it's hilarious because I was extremely frightened of, LSD because of the after school special with
That
Helen Hunt, and she took it and then she jumped out the window of the school. I wanna say it was the school, and broke her leg, and so because it was presented as a cautionary tale, I was so young when I saw that, it really scared me. And also, I think kind of the hippie drug movement that I grew up, like, I was born in '68, and so I saw Woodstock footage and films, and I saw these people tripping out, and my mother was living in San Francisco when I was an infant at one point, and being a sober person, she said, I saw people who were, heavily scholarly and super smart just kind of lose their minds taking these drugs." And she was really kind of an anti-psychedelic person, and so the way she posed it, and this is what made it more attractive to me, was the way that she posed it was that, some people took it and they tripped out and then they never came back. And so I think that was also, and we had some member of our family who took it once and then they had a child that had some developmental issues, and then there was always this connection that this person taking psychedelics had had some effect on the DNA, and so
no.
there was that kind of fear mongering that was happening also. So, I think she was as free thinking as she also was coming from this fundamentalist Christian perspective, this very Baptist perspective that you don't do drugs, you don't drink, you don't dance, so I think that influenced it too. But it also is what I rebelled against.
Yeah, for sure. The drug propaganda movies always piqued my interest. Although I think on some level I knew that they were probably totally bullshit, but like, what is this thing that these people are making these bullshit
Yeah,
propaganda films about? Like,
yeah.
I want to know what the real deal is, which I think is what led me into the research of finding out what was behind all of that. And you know, still in the residue of the 60s, and all the art and music and stuff
Yeah.
that came from that, and a movement, the hippie movement, starting with the beat movement. Yeah, all of it fascinated me, and Mad Magazine, which was
Yeah.
all had tons of drug culture references in it, so I was primed to try that, and I'm very glad that I did. I mean, and then I would trip on school nights in my parents' house directly across the hallway from them, and I would stay up all night long and listening to this new music that I just discovered, Susie and the Banshees, and, oh, it was immensely blissful, and somehow I made it through school the next day, but I saw nothing wrong with that. I saw it was all up for grabs, and the exploration was ripe for the experiencing, and I'm glad that I did that. I had a blast.
I think I was way more, um I think because of the time of the trauma, the period that that stuff happened in my childhood, basically from 12 to 14, 12 to 15, that particular period, I was so desirous to get away from my family and the trauma that I was experiencing in my family that when my friend came back into my sphere and she was a pot smoker, I think that was the thing that really opened the door to me because the first time I smoked, I can remember feeling like everything that, like, kind of had a hold of me just kind of fell away, and I felt I I never laughed as hard as I laughed that night, and I never felt that good, and I really wanted that, and so I think that was more the lure than, any other cultural things that were maybe dissuading me or discouraging me. So it's all about timing, I think.
Absolutely. I could have laughed all night. I was escaping boredom and what I thought was an oppressive regime at my house, basically stemming from my mother. And again, not like Pink Floyd The Wall or anything like that, but, you know, just harshing my mellow and being very, overprotective, and any escape that I could get from that, which if that meant tripping balls on LSD, across the hallway from my parents' room, then so be it. But I just had to expand my reality past the reality that was being, reinforced all around me, which I thought was rather one-dimensional and monochromatic.
Yeah, it's funny how those things have kind of an antithetical response than they're intended. I think had your mom been taking LSD and drinking heavily or smoking weed heavily, you may not have been so jazzed to do that because I think sometimes that makes those things seem unhip. And so I definitely see that not that the kids don't think we're hip or think we're hip. I think they just have a different grasp on reality or a different
Yeah.
viewpoint of reality, so there's not this urgency to escape.
It's called evolution, and I
Yeah,
think
maybe. I
I have
mean,
evolved from my parents' generation. Not like I'm better, but I think I'm better at certain things maybe than they were.
yeah,
And
I know some kids who drank very heavily because their parents drank very heavily, or they smoked a lot of weed because their parents smoked weed. So I just find it interesting that just this cocktail that we are in right now, this alchemy that we're in right now, that that is not that's not a lure.
Mhm.
Like no one in our family is like, oh, they seem really cool when they get high, so I'm gonna get high.
Yeah,
And it's also that we've given those things up. So it's not like we're doing stuff to rebel against.
yeah. Okay,
There
my
you go.
bladder is gonna rebel against this room if, we keep talking much longer, which I'm sorry, I would like to go on longer. Rick, fantastic dude. I'm glad that he came on for the second time, and hopefully he'll come on again. Then we don't have to wait for his Genesis book to be done
Yeah,
to initiate that. But
exactly.
thank you, Rick. Highly recommend his book. Again, we will have the link on our bookshop.org link that it will be on our website. It actually is already on our website, but I just don't have the book up there yet. And you can get it through there and not support Satan.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, guys.
Yes, go to our website, themeltpodcast.net. Yeah, that's right. And there's a way to contact us through there, or
Hunter-Muse at protonmail.com.
and thank you so much for listening and for giving us your valuable attention. Much love to you all, and I hope that you glean something or many things positive from this conversation. Ta-ta.